Hello. Before I leave Portugal, I have a few stories I want to tell about Brazil. Brazil's northeast is where I learned Portuguese. That's where I lived, Catolé de Rocha in Paraíba. For 3 years I lived there. And during that time, I got to know a man named Wayne Frost. He was also a Peace Corps volunteer. I'm thinking he's 5, maybe more years older than me. And he's a brilliant man. He's an artist, and he's one of the ones who got me to look at details, taught me to do that. Look in people's backyards to see whether or not they're a tradesman, a craftsman. He also worked in crafts in a town called Patos. Maybe later on I'll show you some of his work. Anyway, I wanted to mention him for a reason that you'll see in a moment. I also wanted to mention a man named Michael Bruce Herncane. Now, he lives in the same town where I live. He's a poet. He's also an artist and a friend of mine. And he and I together published poems, little books of poems. Here, for example, we published this under pen names, pseudonyms, and then that was called Our Poems. Our Poems, you know, it's in our talk writing. And then we published some more poems. And then here was one that we never actually brought to publication, but it was ready. Second folio, we called it. On the back of some more poems, there's a set of rules. See if I can hold this still, and I'll try a couple of possibilities for you focusing on it. Rules for dueling poets, I think it says. Dutch Corner rules for dueling poets. Well, what we did was we dueled. There would be one poem of his and one poem of mine, and I think we had 12. And then people were supposed to judge, okay, who's the better poet? Well, dueling poets is something that I had learned about in Brazil. Poets actually would do that. They were called repentistas. Repentistas. They would actually work together, two poets back and forth. Here's the Brazilian word for it, repentistas. I was fascinated by them because I saw a connection to the epic poets. These repentistas usually couldn't read, or they might be able to read, but they certainly didn't memorize a poem and sing it. They amazingly sang their poetry spontaneously, like Homer did, or like a freestyle rapper would do. Cowboys, and they would play guitars. Anyway, Wayne Frost knew a lot about this, and let me, and so you see, I'm going to try to bring all this stuff together. Wayne Frost told me a story about a guy named Padre Cicero. I never met him. I was never actually in San Francisco. San Francisco is in another state, Bahia, I think, or maybe Pernambuco. I'm not sure. Anyway, I think it was Wayne Frost. I'm almost certain it was Wayne Frost that told me a story. Well, I remembered the story. And then later on, I wrote it. See if I can find it now. Later on, I wrote it down and called it a poem. I called it The Saint. And I want to read it to you, but I want to tell you also that when I wrote this, I was substitute teaching for Latin, and the kids were working, and I wrote this down. And when I got to the end of it, I said to the kids, I have a small class of kids, they've been good studying. I said, hey, I just wrote a poem. You want to hear it? And they said, sure. So I read this to them, and I'll come back to that in just a little bit. It goes like this. Maybe I could come a little bit closer to do this reading. The Saint. Padre Cicero is a living saint to the peasants of much of the dry lands of Brazil. There are many stories about him. Here is one. A very poor tinsmith came to him because with the arrival of electric lights in San Francisco, he was losing his market for the little kerosene lamparinas that he had always made and that his father had made before him. The tinsmith was building up a tremendous stock of them, and they weren't selling the way they always had. Padre Cicero told him to keep working and to trust in God. The tinsmith came again later. His situation was worse. Padre Cicero told him the same, and the tinsmith never lost his faith. Once a year, from all of Brazil's northeast, peasants flocked to São Francisco to hear the best of the cowboy singing poets, the repentistas, duel. Everyone, of course, attends Mass in the huge church. During Mass, Padre Cicero announced that on that night he would hold a special lamplight service, and that he hoped everyone would bring a little lamparina, just like the one he held up to show them. Well, I got to the end of that back in the Latin class, and I looked, and there was a girl, 9th grade girl. She was crying, and that doesn't happen very often. You wonder what's going on when one of your students is crying. And I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "I'm sorry, it was your poem." and I understood. I'm not sure if I ever had another poem make somebody cry, but all right, there you have it. I've put a bunch of stuff together, and let's see. And the video that you will see in the next two parts deal with the leaving of Lisbon. They speak for themselves. The reason you haven't seen any of Erica's work the last few days is because she did not go to Sintra with me. She stayed at the hostel, she did wash, and then she went back out to Cascais, and we sort of went different ways. All right, see you next time.